I'm with my absolute dear, wonderful friend, Jeff Slate. We're going to talk about the single. We're going to talk about Bowie. We're going to talk about everything in music and everything that we love. So, Jeff, you know how much I love you. And you know how
I
much
love you too, Simon.
I appreciate your time. So, you've got a new single out.
I do have a new single out.
It's got a lot of people playing on it as well.
True.
So tell us about it. Tell us about the single.
Well, I hatched this idea. I've always loved the song, Ronnie Lane's song, The Poacher. Ronnie Lane, of course, I came to know him through the Small Faces and the Faces, but of course he had a great solo career until he developed MS and died of MS, I think in June 97. So we're coming up on the anniversary. But I always loved his solo song, The Poacher. I love all his songs, but I particularly love The Poacher. And I guess it was more than 10 years ago, but I hatched this idea to do a charity single of it for an MS charity, and asked my old buddy Pete Townsend to do it. And he said, I remember that he said yes, and he remembers that he didn't say anything or said no, or I don't remember. But anyway, so when we started making the new album, because I'm in the middle of making a new album, which is actually done,
yeah,
but because of supply chain issues, it probably won't come out until this time next year, right, because of vinyl and all, promotional issues and everything.
Yeah.
But the album is kind of done, and I wanted to put something out. So anyway, so we were making the record. I contacted Pete because I wanted to do it. And at that point, it was really just, I'd done sort of a live electric guitar with a drummer and a vocal. And that was kind of it. And he was not working, it was the middle of the pandemic, and he was working on some archival stuff, and he just didn't want to, just not interested. No problem. I was disappointed, of course, but
sure.
Hey, but so then I decided, well, I'm going to put it on the album because it gives a little relief in the middle of the record to all the other songs that are mine.
Yeah.
And it gives us something, I wanted to do it to honor Ronnie, and the vibe of the record has a kind of, I'm very influenced by Ronnie Lane and the Small Faces and the Faces. So, so the next step was, I had done at a session a few years ago, I had Adam Ippolito, who was in John Lennon's Plastic Ono Elephants memory band back in the 70s. I had him put on piano and Hammond organ. So I think maybe I had done a guitar along with Adam when we did that, but that was it. The track was just, basically scratch drums or a click track and Adam and me. And so I sent it around to everybody and that I wanted to play on it. And the first step was getting Ben Gordelier from Paul Weller's band to put on the drums.
Yeah.
And it was funny because he did it and he sent it to me, and they were just explosive. They were these sort of Keith Moon drums. So I was like, oh my God, that's great. And then I didn't hear from him again. We were doing other things. This is all during the pandemic and via, email and text and whatever. And we were sort of done with the drums. And I said, hey, what about the poetry? He said, oh, I never did the Poacher. So I sent him the text back that he sent me he's like, oh yeah, right, I remember that. Okay, sure. Sent me the drums, and then so then I had the drums and sort of a basic track to work to. And I got my friend Joan Chew from the band Led Zeppelin, who are an all-girl Led Zeppelin tribute band here, to play bass. Bro. And she also is an amazing violinist. So she put on the little violin flourish. And then it's almost a year ago, back last spring, I guess it was May or June, Earl Slick and I went up to a studio in Connecticut when we had a little bit of a break from the lockdown there when we all got vaccinated or whatever.
Yes.
We went up to a studio up in Connecticut for about a week and did all the guitars, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, worked with the producer, Eric Lichter, and he did some guitars and keyboards and backing vocals, and, added all the stuff. And so it was, it was the track was kind of done.
Yeah.
But it just felt not 100% complete. And so I'd been bugging, Steve Cradock had put some piano, of all things, on a track of mine back during the pandemic. And when we were finishing it up, we were about to start mixing the track. I said, Steve, I really feel like, it needs something. It's just, I don't know what it is. And so I sent it to him, and I thought he was going to put on a backing vocal, but he loved the backing vocal that the producer had done. He said, I think that's great. It's better than what I could do, or whatever. And he really didn't have time because he was about to go out on the road or start rehearsals, I guess, with Paul Weller.
Yeah.
So he said, let me see what I can do. So that was, over the weekend. And then on the Monday, he sent me the track, and he put on 2 or 3 acoustic guitars, a 6-string and a 12-string guitar that play kind of a counter melody to what Joan and Slick and I are doing. And then also did a lap steel guitar toward the end. It's kind of faint. People have to listen for it, but it adds a little ambience to the track toward the end. Gives a little lift. And, sent it to the guy who's mixing the record, this guy, Dwayne Lundy, who's just an amazing, he's worked with Ringo and Ryan Adams and all these amazing artists. And so he had already done a mix, but he added these pieces into it, and it changed the whole character, because it gave it, it just gave it kind of it twinkled, it kind of had this sort of twinkly sound. So I got to thank, really hats off to Steve, because I didn't know, because he was like, well, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, I don't know, that's your job. I don't know, and so hats off to him, because he really did know what to do.
Yeah, and you know what? I can honestly say, probably because of the fan that I am of his and how well I know him, and obviously the impact he's had on me and my life, and listening to him for how many years now. Do you know what? You can recognize the sound of him as a musician and the way that he plays. He has his own individual, sound of how he put something onto music, let's say.
Absolutely.
And he definitely has a huge impact on the record, Jeff. He must be so proud to obviously be able to speak to these people and for them to help you out.
Look, Steve is a legend and an amazing guitar player. Everybody on the track is amazing.
Yeah.
Slick certainly does his thing. He, I wanted it not to be sort of to sound like the Small Faces, or even the Faces, and certainly our guitars together have that Faces-y kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they're a little more, they're a little more rock and roll. So I think Steve really gives it that mod sensibility, and gives it. There's a beauty to the way Steve Cradock plays that I think it gets lost, because he's been around for so long. We see him all the time live, with the specials and with Weller and with OCS, and so it's not that we take him for granted, but we're so used to him being part of our lives. It's like when I got the tracks and I just listened to Steve's tracks alone with the voice, because I just I have the individual stems, so I just put them up and listen to them alone. I said to the engineer, let's do an acoustic mix of this, because it's just it's so amazing to hear what he did just by himself, because it's beautiful. But so maybe as we get closer to the release of the record, we'll do that. But this was just a tease, because I talked to the label, and because of the supply chain issues and the way you have to promote a thing, you have to book a tour and all these other things, it really wasn't feasible to put out the record until next year. And so with that in mind, I thought, well, it's done. I want to do something now. Ronnie Lane's birthday was coming up, the anniversary of his passing is coming up, and so I wanted to put out something right away. So the easy way to do it, rather than do physical product, is just put it up on streaming services, and it's done incredibly well. It's gotten over 10,000 streams in a week, and it's now getting closer to 15,000 now, and
Yeah.
Hopefully by the time this airs, it'll be closer to 20. I don't know. Knock on wood. We'll see. But that's a lot for a guy like me, and a lot of it has to do with the players, and everybody has been very generous in sharing it and talking about it. Being very positive in their social media. Steve retweeted it and shared it on his Instagram, and some of the other guys too, and the Paul Weller crowd and the mod crowd and the Ronnie Lane fans and the small faces. They've all been very, very, very supportive. I got some notes from people who knew Ronnie, who really loved the track. There were some who were like, "Oh, I like the original version because it's more down home and acoustic," but that's Ronnie Lane's version in 1970, whatever. I was trying to do something that was, first of all, me, but also had a rockier edge to it. So no disrespect, but people, it wasn't even a negative comment. They were just saying, I like this, but. So, I'm happy anybody is listening at this point.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. And you know what, Jeff, it's a great sounding record. The vocals, your vocals are brilliant on it. The sound is brilliant on it. And, when the sun is shining, you can put it on and have a beer or whatever you do, and everyone's happy. But
it's funny you say. I appreciate that, and I think that's true with spring coming. It does feel like it feels like a summer track.
Yeah, it is.
I will say this: the vocal, which a lot of people have commented on, was the original scratch vocal. I mean, that's the vocal I did live with the drummer when we did the demo. I did my electric guitar.
Yeah.
And my vocal from that original session a couple of years ago, that's just one take. That was just the vocal. And I always meant to get around to doing it better or fixing it or, redoing it, whatever. And we got closer and closer to the end. And I said to the guy who was mixing it and to the producer as well, Eric Lichter, what do you think? And they were like, it's great. It sounds great. I wanted to do it so it aligned a little bit more with Slick's guitar and Ben's playing, but they were like, then you're overthinking it. Just, this is just what you did in that moment. And it's good. There's no technical problem. So just leave it. So that's the original book. One take.
Hey, that's amazing.
That's amazing.
we both know there's people that we totally idolize, like, that the great that do. That's a special gift. That is really good. I can praise you enough for doing that, but you know what? That's really brilliant. You should be so proud.
I am. I'm very proud of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, with the track as well, and we talk about OCS and Weller and the small faces, of course, and time period, but the mud scene for both of us, I think, is so important. That there's still people out there that love that sound and that time period, and it sort of keeps that flame going with that sound, let's say, because it's a pretty I think it's the greatest thing in the world, being the fashion, the influence, the music, the people, the lifestyle, everything that comes in that huge bubble of like the mud scene, let's say. Yeah. It's really good. What does it mean to you?
Well, it's the music I love the most and the scene I love the most. And so, as a kid growing up, I had inherited records from my older brothers and sisters. So the Who and the Kinks, and especially the Beatles and a few other artists, they were the things I listened to. Elvis and Little Richard and Chuck Berry. Yeah. They were things that I inherited from people. But I was in a band when I was about 13 with a couple of older kids. And one rehearsal practice. It wasn't we weren't rehearsing for anything. We were just practicing. One of the kids came to the rehearsal with some records, and he said, he gave me He gave me The Who's My Generation.
Yeah.
He gave me There Are But Four Small Faces, which is an American compilation.
Yeah.
And he gave me All Mod Cons by the Jam.
Right.
And he said, this, you're gonna love this. And I already knew, from the Who, I already knew I loved Who's Next and Quadrophenia. And, those were sort of my records. And I knew they were a mod band, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And so I spent the weekend listening to those three records, and it changed my life. It became, those records became the touchstone. And it was very hard. This is the, like 1982 or 1, 2, 3, I can't even remember, 1980 actually. So it wasn't easy to find Small Faces records in the United States, or the sort of, older Who records, or, and the Jam were just, they were known, but you had to go to like a proper record shop with the guy who, sat behind the counter and was, oh, I know, I'll order it for you. The whole thing, you had to pay half up front or whatever the hell it was. Anyway, but those records, because I had around that same time discovered the Clash. And I think, the Who and the Small Faces became my touchstones because they looked so cool.
Yeah.
Because the music was so incendiary, but because it also had such a soulful vibe to it. And I had already, fallen in love with American 60s, early 70s soul through my brother-in-law, because he'd introduced me to the Isley Brothers and the Spinners, and Marvin Gaye and Otis Redding and all the, Otis Rush, and sort of all these people that make up that world, Curtis Mayfield especially, and the Impressions, and Al Green, like all these people that like so many people. William Bell, I really loved William Bell, but they were so far outside. I was like a middle-class kid growing up in Connecticut. It was so far out of my world. But like the Who and the Small Faces, they weren't, especially when they were young. The Who when they were young, and the Small Faces didn't last very long.
Sure.
The Beatles or even the Stones, they seemed untouchable.
Yeah.
They didn't seem like you couldn't be the Beatles, but the Who and the Small Faces felt like a gang of guys. Yeah. That if you got a gang of guys together, you could be that gang of guys. Right.
I get that. Yeah.
And so, I started, dressing neat, sharper, and, as best I could with the pocket money I had at sort of 13 years old. And constantly trying to upgrade that. And, when I founded my first band in like my first professional band, sort of 84-ish, we were a 3-piece. The only reason we were a 3-piece and not a 4-piece is I didn't want 2 guitars. I wanted a guitar and a Hammond organ, but we were like 16 or 17 years old. There's no Hammond organ players, just like hanging around.
Yeah.
So we ended up being a 3-piece because it was like, okay, well, we don't have a Mick Jones, and it was good enough for the Jam. So we'll just be loud and fast and punky and have a kind of a soul, sort of clashy Jam vibe, that sort of mixture of the two, sort of part American and rockabilly and old school rock and roll, and part that pumped up R&B, mod thing. And here we were different than everybody else, but very few people made the connection. It wasn't until much later in my life, that after I'd worked with Pete Townsend, and after I'd gotten to know Weller a little bit, and after I'd gotten, connected through the internet, with people, I got connected with people here in America who also loved mod music, because it was hard to find them, but especially with this group of mostly people in the UK, but also Germany and Japan and other places. There was an online group in Yahoo called Splinters, and it was really just Paul Weller fans. But because they were Paul Weller fans, they were also Jam fans, Style Council fans. They were also fans of Northern Soul, and they were also fans of the Small Faces. And so it was like I really connected with this group of people, many of whom I still know, and I'm friends, on Facebook with. Gary Crowley was a member, and Stuart D-Bill was a member, and John Abnett was a member, and these guys, Flavio and Nacho, and all these guys, Dave Beasley, who runs the Paul Weller News Service, these guys were all part of that. And I guess I've met. So later, I was in a band called The Badge, and we toured the UK a lot, and we had kind of a Kinksy Small Faces sound, and a lot of those people came to the shows, and we played a lot of mod festivals, and so I got to meet in person a lot of these people. But it almost didn't matter. I felt like I'd known them my whole life, and we were kindred spirits anyway.
Yeah.
So my buddy Pete Wilkie, who's a writer, poet mostly, wrote a book about mod. It's probably 10 years ago, and he had people contribute chapters, and I contributed a chapter about what it is to be kind of an American mod when there's no other mods. And if you I mean, we still to this day, when I play gigs, we still to this day play a Small Faces tune if I can squeeze it in. Sure. And nobody knows who it is. No. Or if they do, they get it wrong. They think it's the Faces, or even if they know it's the Small Faces, they're not mods. They're just rock and roll fans. So it's very rare that you meet a kindred spirit.
Where I'm working at the minute, there's this chef, and she works in pastry, but she likes all the stuff that we sort of like, but she's quite young, early 20s, let's say. We were talking about different bands and different, music that we like.
Sure.
Talking about old stuff, yeah. It's like, oh, I like the Kinks. She's like, who are the Kinks? I'm like, excuse me, who are the Kinks? I'm like, you need to listen to the Kinks, Yeah. And
it'll change your life. It amazes me how bad the Kinks are at promoting their own legacy, because they really are. They're up there with the Beatles and the Stones and the Who. They absolutely, absolutely are.
I've got to tell you this, right? So me and my best friend Rudders, we went to see Ray Davies at the Symphony Hall in Birmingham, okay? I was the one that went to get the tickets at the ticket office. We were like front row in the balcony at Symphony Hall in Birmingham, right? And it was on the Saturday night, right? And we was about 23, 24, let's say.
Sure.
So I'm saying to him, we'll have beers and that before the gig, but when the gig finishes, we're just going home so we can remember this gig for the rest of our lives, okay? Because if we go out afterwards and have a night on the town, let's say, it all gets lost. It all gets lost. So, and I was like, Jeff, saying, that's it. We're going home. It might finish at like 10:30, 11 o'clock, but we're not going out. We're going home. And we did. And I'm so glad we did, because, he picked up his acoustic guitar and just played like Waterloo Sunset and tunes like that. And he told his little stories about him and his brother in London. I'll treasure that forever, because he's a special guy and definitely part of, obviously, the mod scene and that. So, yeah, really brilliant to say that I've seen him.
I've had the great fortune of interviewing Ray probably 5 or 6 times over the course of my life, and he's one of the few people who, when I'm talking to him, I'm very aware of who it is and how important he has been in my life. I know he's important in anybody who's going to read the article or listen or whatever. I know it's him. I know he's important in their lives too, but for me, he's one of those seminal figures that, he invented what I aspire to do. Right. And so there's kind of, and not just, he's up there with Lennon and McCartney, and it took 2 of them to do those songs.
Yeah.
He was doing it all by himself. And so I think, much like Pete Townsend, except he invented that for, he was doing those things that Pete does so well, even before Pete did. He was sort of creating the rule book or the playbook, as you will. And so I think, there's just no higher figure in my book than Ray Davies, really. Yeah.
I think that's totally amazing to say. And I think it goes maybe under the radar with the way that time ticks on for people,
yeah.
But there's still people.
Yeah, well, they've never had really very good management. They've never had they've never really promoted themselves in a way that did them justice. Yeah. They had a lot of legal problems and a lot of the fighting between the brothers and whatever. And it's just unfortunate that there were so many groups in that mid 60s era who are better at promoting themselves, that, other bands have been elevated and the Kinks have kind of fallen by the wayside. Yeah. I just think that's a disservice to their legacy, because they, I know there are Hollies fans out there, for instance, but the Hollies do not deserve the same respect and reputation, as the Kinks. They were a nice little pop band from Birmingham. I know you love your Birmingham, but they were a pop band and not much else, with a couple of good records. But the Kinks were, they have a catalog of music that stretched over, a 30, 40-year career that is just unbelievable. And if you really dig into it, not just those early hits, but if you really dig in over the years and years and years, some of the albums that were complete flops, are really, really amazing. And even if you don't love the whole record, there's always going to be half a dozen songs, and that's a lot on a record, that that you'll listen to for the rest of your life. So I think, anything I can do, I never miss an opportunity to talk about the Kinks and also to write about the Kinks if I can.
I have to tell you that before we change, this is going to lead us into this next subject, which I think is pretty good. But I think there's a couple of Kinks tracks that are just really been important to me and my life. Dead End Street by the Kinks. Love Dead End Street. Afternoon Tea, right? Sure. Harry Rag. I suppose talking about Ray and the Kinks will bring us into talking about someone who's in the same league, someone who is truly, high up in the rank. Talking about Bowie is something which is pretty special, because I think, Jeff, that he is one of the most important people maybe ever to be in the music business. Up there with Lennon, McCartney, all the greats. But I think Bowie's in a league of his own. And I said this to my mate Griffiths a long time ago, before Bowie passed on. If I could have seen anyone live, Bowie would have been my number one.
I never saw David. Wow.
Never saw David.
Okay.
Yeah. But there you have it.
Yeah.
But his record and his music, I think, is just, well. Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting, because when I was a kid growing up, and I got into Bowie around the same time as The Who and the Small Faces and all those bands, sort of late 70s, early 80s, I started collecting his records.
Yeah.
My sister liked it, and my sister had a pretty broad musical taste and was really encouraging, because most people, when you talk about him, similar to the Small Faces, but in a different way, they didn't know who he was, or they thought he was very weird.
Yeah.
Wasn't really a rock and roll guy. Like, the bands that people liked were very rock and roll. Not the roll part so much as the rock part.
Yeah.
And he was very creative. He was always changing his sound. And, you got to remember, at the time I was discovering David Bowie, he was in the middle of the Berlin trilogy. He'd already done sort of the hunky dory kind of stuff. He'd already done the Ziggy stuff. He'd already done the Young Americans and Station to Station soul stuff. And now he was already, so this is already like the third or fourth part of his career in about a 10-year period.
Yeah.
So people were really confused and a little put off by that. They didn't understand why he just didn't do Fame again, or whatever. So, because when I remember when Heroes came out, people liked it, but it was like, it wasn't a massive song
No.
We were young, but it wasn't like a massive song. It wasn't on AM radio all the time, which was the real pop radio here.
Yeah.
And similarly, Sound and Vision, just people, when Fashion came out, Ashes to Ashes really didn't make a dent here in the States, but Fashion really did. It was mainly because of MTV, which came a little later.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, he was the person that pretty much only the weirdest kids liked.
Yeah.
He wasn't this megastar until, and we're talking, I think today that you and I are talking is actually the 39th anniversary of Let's Dance.
Yes.
When Let's Dance came out, that was when, because of MTV to a large degree, and because he courted a more mainstream audience, he became a mainstream artist. Yeah. But I think it wasn't really until after he died and people realized, the internet, the outpouring of grief, but also just people telling their stories about their love for David Bowie, reminded people who just kind of liked him, how truly different and unique and great he was. And I also think he was so far ahead of his time, always. Yes. That now in 2022, he feels very sort of the times. All that stuff he did is now part of the rock and roll tapestry. But when he was doing it, only the weirdest and oddest were doing it. It was really after he died that people realized how important and how significant he was. And I think that was, that's sad in a way, but I think it's also amazing that to know that his legacy is bigger now that he's gone. And, the respect he gets just from, you walk down the street. If you walk down the street 15 years ago and ask people about David Bowie, certainly here in New York, they'd know who he was, but they wouldn't, just go, they wouldn't be like over the moon about him. And now, we do our annual David Bowie show for his birthday. We've done it. We started doing it, I think, before he died, but we've done it now for 7 or 8 years. And it's a sellout every time. Originally before Omicron struck, we were going to do 2 nights. We only did 1 night just because I never believe gigs are going to happen anymore.
No, I know.
So we only booked 1, but I think next year we'll probably do 2, and we could probably do more. I think they always sell out. It's always a great crowd. People have their stories. They dress up. People come to the show and they dress up with their, they got their third eye and the orange hair, and it's like, it's amazing to see, and it's fun for the band and the guest performers too, because we get to play these songs that, they're not the songs. It's funny, we've been talking about doing a show for the Stones 60th anniversary this summer. Right. It's almost like you don't even need to rehearse as a rock and roll musician to play a Stones show, because those are songs you've played 1,000,000 times. Yeah. With David Bowie, there's a few that we've played a lot, but many, unless you're playing a Bowie show, you won't play in your set. And you haven't played 1,000,000 times with your bands in your garages or basements or whatever over the course of your life. So it's nice. It's nice to see that his legacy gets bigger and bigger every year.
Oh, definitely. And when I spoke to my mate Mark about obviously the channel and everything, we would talk. He was like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm making an episode on Bowie," and it's just like, "Oh, right." And we talked about what it means to us and how amazing he is, and individual. We were reading individual tracks and like going through like your greatest hit sort of things and going through tracks, right? And it's he was saying, do you know what? When you talk about David Bowie, you can talk about him, but I just think everyone has their own story.
Yeah.
Of what Bowie means to,
yes.
The fan. I mean,
because there's so many different David Bowies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the first time I would have seen Bowie, or he would have come into my life, was when it was in 1985, like say on Top of the Pops. Sure. when he's doing songs like with Mick Jagger, dancing in the street. Oh,
sure, dancing in the street, right? Oh my God.
Yeah, oh. I think that would have been the first time that I think I can even remember seeing that on TV. The video in that, but from then, and obviously with the influences of being who we're into, and I think the way you look at,
we could bring it back to Dancing in the Street. The guitar player on that track is Earl Slick. So there you go.
That's amazing. I never knew that.
Yeah. They cut the track, and Mick wasn't thrilled with the way it came out. They were mixing it.
Yeah.
And he called Slick, thinking he was in New York, and said, can you come in and do the guitar? And he said, sure. When? He said, now. And Slick said, well, I'm in LA. And he said, well, be here in the morning.
Yeah.
And sent him a ticket, and he got on a plane, did the overnight, got to the studio in the morning, cut the track. They mixed the track that night. And that night was Mick's, maybe, I think it was his 40th birthday at our 45th birthday party at the Palladium here in New York.
Right.
And Slick went to the party and ended up hanging out with Woody and Keith. So there you go.
that's bonkers. That's bonkers.
Yeah, but that's his life. It's a crazy life he's got.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I was watching Earl Slick on YouTube talk about Bowie, right? And when they were playing live. And for what Earl Slick was, this is really brilliant. He was talking about when Bowie was live and the way that he controlled the show and the way that obviously the musicians worked the sound with his playing, with the voice. Like if Bowie just knew for the showman that he was, it's time for you to do your bit. And
yes,
the way that Earl Slick was just talking was just saying that he was a good leader. Bowie was a good leader.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think part of that was he didn't have ego about giving someone else the spotlight. In other words, if it was time for Slicky to shine, he would let him shine.
Yeah.
He also was really great. One of the great things, in after he died, I did a lot of pieces about him for various magazines. And one of the interviews I did was with Mike Garson, who was his keyboard player over the years, many, many times, which he said, which I thought was sort of perfectly encapsulated David Bowie, is he was like a casting director.
Yeah.
He would pick you for the role he knew you could play, even if you didn't know it.
Yeah.
And he would let you do what you did best. He wouldn't tell you what part to play. He would let you be creative, and the track, the song would inevitably blossom.
Yeah.
You would think, oh, well, he was just taking their ideas. No, it wasn't that. He knew what he wanted. He knew that if he got Earl Slick versus a different guitar player, that it was going to give him a certain sound, a certain vibe, a certain energy. And that's what he wanted for that particular song. So I think, that's why he worked with so many different people over the years of different styles, all different styles of music, because he was looking for different things at different points in his career.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even on different songs within the same album. So I think that's an amazing attribute of him.
I wonder who Bowie's, who he really loved. I wonder who
back to Ray Davies. He was a huge Kinks fan. I do know that.
Right. Yeah.
And he loved, I know this too, he loved Little Richard. Right. I think he modeled a lot of, sort of his stage persona on, I mean, he certainly got a lot from mime and dance and things like that, and just from theater. But I think the rock and roll part of his persona came from Richard, and a lot of the flamboyance, the glam came from Richard.
Yeah, because I think I mean, when we talk about people like Little Richard, I think for me personally, obviously I know him, I probably know the hits, right? But it's difficult for me to listen to them records. I wouldn't think straight away I'll put that on, but I know for a fact of the 1950s and them people that around at that time has made pretty much where we are today.
Yeah.
In a huge, big, massive way.
Little Richard and Chuck Berry for me are the two cornerstones of rock and roll. Much more. I mean, I loved Elvis as a kid, and I still love Elvis. But I think without Richard and Chuck Berry, because Richard was rock and roll. I mean, he was the performer. He was so flamboyant and amazing and beautiful, and his voice was just such a rock and roll voice.
Yeah.
And Chuck Berry had the sound, the guitar sound, and the word, the poetry.
Sure.
I think without those two guys in particular, rock and roll would be very, very different.
Yeah. And you know what? I have to tell you this because this was brilliant. And I suppose in one way I look at this is because we're talking about people like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, right? How long ago is that now?
65, actually. So yeah.
And that's amazing. But Saturday just gone, me and Susanna are having something to eat. We put on BBC Two, yeah, and it's Top of the Pops 1994, right?
Oh, okay.
And I tell you what, Jeff, it was absolutely brilliant. 1994, I'm like...
94 is a good year.
94 was a good year. And you look at the people that were on Top of the Pops in 1994, Blur, Oasis, Pulp, who else? Unfortunately, Wet, and things like and things like that.
Oh my God, you're funny.
Yeah. But
yeah,
the Britpop scene, like with Elastica and Suede, and that time period, and I just think when you see that now, it made me feel good. I absolutely loved it.
Interestingly, there's a lot of direct through lines from many of those bands right to David Bowie.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Not as much. I mean, people always talk about the Beatles, but not as much direct to the Beatles. There's a lot of like, it's more the ELO version of the Beatles than the actual Beatles that a lot of the bands are aping. But you look at even the beginning of Supersonic, it's T-Rex or David Bowie.
Yeah.
But Blur, Pulp, those bands have a direct connection to David.
They really, really do. They really, really do.
Wait, I mean, there's no band in that group that has a more direct connection. They are David Bowie at a particular point in his career. Yeah.
Yeah. If it wasn't for 1994 and me listening to Oasis, Blur, Pulp, and that made me go out and buy David Bowie records.
Sure.
For definite. Sure. Because they would talk about him. They would definitely talk about him and have that influence from him, and obviously tracks. I think Bowie is the greatest pop star of all time, right?
Yeah, sure.
I honestly really, really think he is. And
because he never stopped being interesting.
No.
Most pop stars have one thing and they do it over and over and over, and eventually they become, you kind of get tired of them and their shtick. But with Bowie, he was constantly reinventing himself and constantly keeping himself interested. I think so that he kept interested in what he was doing. He remained interested in what he was doing. But for us, it kept us intrigued. It's funny you say that about, Blur and Pulp and Suede and, sort of they made you go back and listen to David Bowie. For me, that's what happened for me with the Beatles. With the Beatles, when I got into the Beatles in the 70s as a very young kid, they were talking about Little Richard and Chuck Berry and whatever. And when I was a kid, Little Richard and Chuck Berry would still be on TV once in a while.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I remember seeing Little Richard. I remember seeing Chuck Berry on TV with John Lennon one week when John Lennon co-hosted a show here, but an afternoon talk show, weirdly. But anyway, people can look up the Mike Douglas show. It was strange and amazing. But anyway, and Adam Ippolito, who played on the Poacher, was in the band at the time. But anyway, and I wrote about it for Esquire if people want to look that up. But there was one time, even before that, where Little Richard was on a show. I believe it was the Dinah Shore show, but it might have been the Mike Douglas show, where he showed up and he played, strangely, an Aretha Franklin song. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know it wasn't, but he had a cape and the big bouffant hair and the makeup, and his voice is just amazing. And I was completely transfixed. And I remember it really vividly because I fell in love with rock and roll like that. I was falling in love right in that moment with Little Richard. And I remember my grandfather, who was sitting in a chair behind me because I was laying on the floor like this watching TV. And I remember him like, about Little Richard was sort of everything parents and grandparents hated, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think he cared one way or the other, but I think he certainly would have preferred that it was Dean Martin or whatever. So, and I remember it being over and just, YouTube didn't exist then. That was all I had was in my mind was my memory of what Little Richard was.
Yes.
So over the years, you could see Elvis on TV periodically and certainly the Beatles and whatever, the Stones.
Yeah.
But like some of those other guys like Chuck Berry and Little Richard, you didn't. So they became more elaborate, bigger and bigger and bigger in my mind as the people they are. And they lived up, they certainly lived up to my interpretation, my expectation of them. But it's funny that you say that about Bowie, because that was, the Beatles talked about how important Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Eddie Cochran and some of the Buddy Holly, the Everly Brothers were for them. And I went and discovered those guys because of the Beatles.
Yeah.
James Jamerson, the bass player from Motown, was a huge influence on Paul McCartney. He would talk about, they would talk about the Motown records in interviews when white artists were not talking about black artists, typically. So they were, the Beatles were ambassadors in the same way that the Britpop explosion were ambassadors for the earlier music.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, there's something really interesting that's just popped into my head. With us talking about David Bowie, hey, this is something to say. David Bowie is probably going to have a huge influence in my favorite singer-songwriter over the next, let's say, 6 years or so, right? Because the direction that he's going in, when we talk about Noel, Noel's, I think, got a bit obsessed with Bowie. I think Noel's probably favorite artist now, or has been for a while, has been Bowie. He says the next day is obviously the best album that's come out. Obviously, a certain amount of time. Let's say he did Valentine's Day on the Bowie.
That was because of Earl Slick asked him, and Slicky asked me what song. I suggested he asked Noel, and Slicky suggested Valentine's Day because it was a little offbeat, and he had played on it. And originally, Slick was supposed to play on that, but he was sick when they did the session, unfortunately.
Yeah. Actually, while we're talking about Al, is he okay? Because
he's great.
We had tickets to obviously see him in Newcastle, and he obviously cancelled, and he's coming back next year. Is that right?
I'm pretty sure. I think he's coming back either on his own or with Bernard Fowler, and then I think the two of us are going to come as well.
Right.
So yeah, he'll be over as soon as he possibly can. I think the consensus was that he had Lyme disease,
right,
which is pretty debilitating. He was really tired, and he did make it over there for rehearsals, but he was just not feeling himself, and he doesn't want to get out there and perform if he's not 100%.
Yeah, sure. But coming back to Noel a second with playing Valentine's Day, what? He absolutely nailed that song.
Nailed it.
You know, it just
he made it his own.
Yeah, he did. He did. I don't know how he does it, but he's just he really did. Absolutely.
It sounded like a Noel Gallagher song.
Sounded like a Noel Gallagher song.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing him this year. To see Noel. You know, I think I'm counting down the days because we've not seen.
What's he do? He's doing some festivals there?
Yeah, he's doing like mini kind of festivals. Well, in Newcastle, he's doing like this show in a tent where there's him headlining. He's got the Charlatans with him. He's got Andrew Cushion with him, the Newcastle boy, right? Yep. And Confidence Man with him.
Very cool.
Yeah. But then me and Susanna were going down to London to see, just the two of us, we're going down to London to see him at Kenwood House. So.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. And that he's got Jake Bug with him that day, who I've not seen yet. So that should be quite good.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah.
And Confidence Man and that. So, yeah, I'm seeing Noel twice. Saturday night, me and Susanna are going into Newcastle. We're going to see Weller on Saturday night.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Yeah. Which I'm pretty looking forward to as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The set list looks amazing. I've been following the tour a little
bit.
Same. I will give you a little preview in that since the record is, you know, almost finished, that on a couple of the tracks, I've got Jeremy Stacey playing drums, who does drums on all of Noel's records.
Yes.
Jess Greenfield, our friend, who's been on the show.
Yeah.
And a new addition just added to the very tail end. YC did some vocals.
No way. That's amazing.
Yes.
God, that's really cool. Do you know what? She is brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, she's really, really good.
Yep. So, little surprise for the Noel fans out there.
Yeah. Gonna be happy about that.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
So, what you been listening to these days?
Wow. You know, I will say I've been listening to an awful lot of dub reggae.
Really?
Yes. So, you know, it's really nice around, because a lot of times around the house, you know, I'll just put on the same things I put on all the time.
Yeah, same.
You know, I'm not venturing into new stuff. And so, and when I do venture into new stuff, I kind of find it a little disappointing.
Yeah.
So, so back when I was you know, late teens, early 20s, there was a club here where Don Letts, my buddy Don Letts from Big Audio Dynamite, used to DJ.
Right.
Called Club Negril. And he used to play, you know, I mean, he used to play a lot of stuff, but he played a lot of dub reggae and reggae, because it was supposedly a Jamaican club. But anyway, and it was a scene where, you know, a lot of the people who were sort of youngish at the time, the Beastie Boys were my age, and they were just starting up, and there were a lot of other bands around that time. Who would be there, and I fell in love with that. It was funny because I talked to Don, I don't know, I guess around the time his movie came out. He did a documentary about himself,
right? Or
somebody made a documentary about him. And his book came out recently, and so we've caught up a few times over the last 6 or 8 months.
Sure.
And you know, I've known him since 1982, I guess. So so we always reminisce, and he was recommending records.
Yeah.
And so it got me into, you know how it is when somebody recommends 1 or 2 or 3 records for you, you go down a rabbit hole. You want to find out, like, oh, well, what else is happening in the, you know,
course.
So I've got this dub reggae playlist that I play when I'm walking the dog or when I'm hanging around the house. So that's what I've been listening to lately. And I've been listening to a lot of 70s soul, but the go-to, and Ravi Shankar too, but the go-to has been dub reggae. I don't know.
Talking about 70s soul, that's another thing that we could talk about, the Bowie situation, because when me and Susanna went down to my folks a few weeks back in Bromsgrove, we went to my local pub where I used to work, the Ladybird, right? And I met up with some of my mates, and we was talking about the channel and obviously making a Bowie episode, yeah. And one name came up in particular was Noel Rodgers, right?
Sure.
And we were talking about the connection with like Bowie and Noel Rodgers. He is an amazing man.
Yes.
You know?
Well, look, Bowie wanted to make a hit record. You know,
Yeah.
he wanted to I think their first meeting, he said, I want to make some hits.
Yeah.
And you know, because he had made Scary Monsters, which is probably, as Tony Visconti has said to me, that was their Sgt. Pepper. They were always saying, let's make our Sgt. Pepper. If anything was their Sgt. Pepper, that was it, because it was just such an amazing record. And yet it wasn't the monster smash hit that I think they expected it to be. It was a big hit, but a big hit within, like we were saying before, a certain group of people, you know, a little bit the weirdos, but a little bit the real kind of diehard music fans.
Yeah.
And Bowie was looking to make a big record. So he signed Nile Rodgers on because he wanted to make hits. And Let's Dance and China Girl and Modern Love and, you know, Ricochet, which people hate, but I love Ricochet, just the production, it's amazing. So today that we're talking is the 39th anniversary of the release of Let's Dance, which is amazing.
And you know what? That's probably my favorite Bowie album.
Ah.
I think so. You know, Modern Love, China Girl.
Well, and it still sounds today as fresh as it did the day that it was made.
And
you know, most Bowie does, but that one really, when it comes on the radio, it's like, wow, that is outrageous.
And you know what track I really love? And it's in Tarantino and Glorious Bastards, it's Cat People.
Yes.
That is a great track. That really, that is my favorite Bowie album. And you can play that until the cows come home.
Absolutely.
That
is the version in Inglourious Bastards the Giorgio Moroder version, or is it that version? I think it's the Giorgio Moroder.
I thought it was that version.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Right. I'll take your word.
You'll know.
I don't know. Neither of us knows. Both of us know.
Yeah. But it's really,
you're
really
right.
good.
I mean, look, I've written quite a bit about his love for soul music. I did a piece for Esquire about the Gouster, which was the original version of Young Americans. And I talked to Carlos Alomar, who really introduced David to soul and R&B players here in the US, and the soul scene, took him to the Apollo and whatever. But he said to me, when David said, I want to make a soul record, you know, and Diamond Dogs was already a hint in that direction, because he'd made Ziggy and Aladdin Sane. It was already going toward an American direction, but also a more R&B direction. And so when he came to make the next record, which became Young Americans, he wanted a band that reflected that. And the show, you know, the live tour in '74 became, you know, it morphed from kind of a rock and roll tour and a big theatrical thing to a more soul review. You know, you got to remember, you know, Carlos told me that when he came to his house out in Queens to have his mom's cooking, and because David was so thin and pale, he wanted to fatten him up, you know, they were talking soul, and he said David really knew his stuff. This wasn't a white guy dabbling. This was somebody who really loved it and really knew that music. So you know, they wanted to go to Philly and make a Philly record, and with, you know, cop that Philly International record sound, the MSRB sound. And the thing about it was, you know, before he did it, there were almost no white artists, certainly at his level, making records like that. They were making rock and roll records, or rock, because it was veering more toward rock at that point. Sort of Humble Pie, who I love, but, you know, in that more rock vein, Foghat, and that kind of thing. And so this was much more in an R&B and soul direction. And, you know, he had Luther Vandross and helping him with arrange the lyrics. And it was just, you know, really just amazing. You know, there's sort of a demarcation line with before Fame and after Fame. After Fame, everybody wanted to make a disco record, and it wasn't even disco yet,
Yeah.
Every white artist wanted to make a funky R&B soul record. But it was Bowie and John Lennon and Carlos Alomar who helped them write it.
Yeah.
You know, who took that foot stomping record that they had from their youth and sort of re-energized it and rewrote it so that it was fame. And then the floodgates were open. Everybody was making a record like that. And Bowie himself, you know, he made Golden Years a year later with Flicky. And so, you know, it was a real, you know, that was a real watershed moment in music. And, you know, there were a lot of people who hated, you know, disco sucks and they were burning records here and the whole thing, you know, but the thing about it was, I mean, a lot of that here, especially here in America, was racism. But, you know, the thing about it was, there were a lot of bad records made because there was a lot of Bowie always called it plastic soul. His wasn't plastic soul. David was very soulful, but there was a lot of plastic soul that was made after fame, in the wake of fame. Everybody wanted to have a funky record. Not all of them had the funk. So, but Nile Rodgers, 7 years later, he certainly brought the funk. That group of guys that they had on that record was just, you know, outrageous.
Yeah. Isn't it pretty amazing how two people, right? John Lennon, David Bowie, two people who probably biggest people in Simon's universe of music. They're at the top of the tree, you know. Sure. Them two are right at the top. Yep. Isn't it pretty amazing how New York City had an impact on both of these two people, where they lived, and obviously recorded a lot of stuff. That's another and for me personally,
well, they were English guys who loved American music.
Yes.
You know, but neither one of those guys is going to go live in Memphis or Nashville or whatever.
Just doesn't work.
Yeah, and LA is a dangerous place for rock and rollers to be. You can get in a lot of trouble there. But in New York, you know, the great thing about New York is you can dig in and really enjoy the city, or you can keep to yourself, and people will leave you alone pretty much.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I mean, in my life,
except for in John Lennon's case where they're shooting you. So, you know,
yeah.
Cool.
So what you got planned today?
Today I have to finish my taxes because we have taxes due here in the United States. Thank you for reminding me. I'm gonna walk my dog who was barking earlier, but I've got a couple of guitars I need to do some work on. So I've got an amp set up over here, so I wouldn't forget. And that's gonna be, I'm gonna balance it between, you know, working on the taxes and a little bit of play on the guitar just to keep myself sane.
Nice.
But I've started working on a new record because of the way the supply chain works. If the record that we're finishing now isn't going to come out until next April, I want to have another one so that it can come out, you know, relatively soon after that. I want to get sort of a queue of them going. So I've already started writing it and working with. I think I'm going to work with the same producer again, and Paul Weller's invited us to come over, Slick and I, to come over and record at Black Barn. So, you know, hopefully we'll be getting over there. I mean, I was sort of looking at maybe end of October or November to come over and do some recording and maybe do a couple of shows, just acoustic shows, and sort of see how things are.
Yeah. Excellent. Are you going to come up north to play?
Well, we would certainly do Liverpool, which is up close enough to you, because you know I've got a bit of a fan base in Liverpool and some friends there.
Birmingham, would you play?
If you book me, we'll come.
Right.
Find me a. I mean, we're just going to do, when we come with the band. When we come and do a full tour for the record, we'll absolutely come to Birmingham. We'll do Manchester and Birmingham and Liverpool, you know, all three, certainly. But and Leeds and Leicester. And I already know the itinerary because I know where we're, you know, down south, we'll do Brighton and London and but for an acoustic tour, I was thinking we'd probably just pretty much stay around London, do a couple acoustic things, but it might be worth it to come up to do something up north, you know, if not in Birmingham or Manchester, certainly in Liverpool.
Well, if you're down in London, we could obviously come down to see you.
You could.
You know, that would be amazing. In fact, we'd come down to London to see you because that's nice, you know.
Well, I haven't been over there in a while, so I would like to get around a little bit, but it really depends on the state of things and depends on who, you know, if I can get Steve to play with us, or if it's just me and Slick, or if it's me and Steve. I don't know what the configuration is, or, you know, both of them might be busy. They're busy guys.
Yeah.
So, so it really depends on people's schedules and how that works out.
Oh, I'm going to see Simon and Oscar in Whitley Bay in May.
Oh,
so
cool.
Do their obviously acoustic thing.
Oh,
yeah. So we've got Noel booked up twice. Well, on the weekend, we're going to see Kings of Leon in Newcastle in June. Two things just before you go, right?
Sure.
Taylor, what do you think about that?
Taylor?
Foo Fighters drummer.
Oh, well, anybody, Taylor Hawkins.
Yeah.
You know, anybody dying at 50 is a tragedy, but, you know, by all, I never met him, not a Foo Fighters fan, but,
No.
you know, but, you know, it's a terrible loss. And he was so much, you know, with Dave Grohl, sort of the spirit of that band.
Yeah.
You know, he was the face of the band. You know,
yeah.
If you wanted to do an interview, it was impossible to get Dave, so they'd give you Taylor, and
yeah.
he was always a great interview, charming guy.
Yeah.
Apparently, you know, like people really, really, really loved him. A lot of people I know in the business knew him well and really loved him and were crushed by it. But, you know, 50 is just a tragedy, no matter how you slice it.
Yeah, yeah. And have you seen Jack White talk to Zane Lowe on YouTube, like that Apple interview? No. It's really good. It's really.
Yeah, I'm not. I have to say, I'm not a Jack White fan, but but he, you know, I will dial it up. On your recommendation, I will give it a shot.
Yeah, I was watching it the other day. I absolutely love Jack. I mean, if I love Jack, I think now I've worked out if I'm anything, I'm a White Stripes fan. Sure. Right? Out of all of this stuff, I think the White Stripes is obviously the thing that I really love by him. But he was talking about obviously three-man record, like the records and the printing machine and Detroit, and you know, I used to hate Zane with a passion because I used to hate Zane, you know, because he would be this geezer that he wants to promote, like, you know, the music sort of thing on his radio show. When he was on Radio 1, right, he'd be like saying like, oh yeah, I love this band and this band and this band. Then he starts playing this other absolute shit. And I'm just like, oh, John Peel never done that, you know? So, yeah, I always wanted Zane's job, but hey.
Everybody wants Zane's job.
Yeah, I know.
Zane's got a good job. Times I cut Zane a little slack. It's hard to be a DJ these days. Radio is very corporatized, and even what he does now, it's very corporatized. Yeah. When John Peel was doing it, I mean, certainly it was the BBC, but yeah, it was the Wild West compared to what it is now. So, yeah. You know, my feeling is anybody, you know, doing what they love, who's making a living at it, if you have to make some compromises, I try not to hold their feet to the fire too much, because, you know, then we'd hate everybody.
Yeah. Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a corporate world we live in. That's just the reality.
Oh, that's it. You know, hey, look at what we're doing.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Talking about music for an hour.
Talking about music. Right, I better let you go.
Absolutely. I got taxes to file here in America.
Thanks ever so much for everything.
Absolutely. Thanks for talking about the single. I appreciate that. And I hope everybody gets to listen to it. And yeah, you know, put your comments in there. I want to see what people have to say about it. We didn't talk about Bowie. I mean, there's so much to talk about. I know. I feel like we need a part 2 where we just talk about David.
I've got all these. I was going to, you know,
Ziggy.
That
Anniversary of Ziggy coming up.
That is just
you know it would be great. Maybe for the anniversary of Ziggy or the anniversary of one of these records, we pick one record and we talk about that record, because we'll go off on our tangents. But
I mean,
Lodger. Yeah. There you go, hunky dory.
Yeah.
All right, Simon.
Jeff,
you have a great evening, and we'll catch up soon. Thanks for having me on. I hope everybody dials up and listens to the Poacher and any of my other music and sends me comments or comments on the YouTube channel, because I'll read them.
There's a lot of people that love you. There's a lot of people that think you're amazing. And to be honest,
they love you and your show, but I'll take the compliment.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Simon.
I'll speak to you soon.
Say hi to everybody there.
Will do, Jeff. See you now.